Howdy weirdos, I'm Bob, and this is the result of one of my friends telling me to either put up or shut up about Fallout, a property that is very near and dear to my heart. This will hopefully be a structured video, not one of those rambling rants I so often subject my friends to when we hang out. There will be timestamps in the description and spoilers ahead for the Fallout games. Fallout as a franchise has been around a while, and in a couple of different forms over the years. These range from the original top-down isometric RPG in 1997 under Interplay to the 3D games under Bethesda. There is even a TV show being developed by Amazon with Walton Goggins and Kyle MacLachlan. Also, these games are responsible for introducing a generation to their grandparents' sex jams. The precise number is of course unknowable, but there is a non-zero number of Fallout fans whose parents were conceived to these songs. My first experience with Fallout was during a sleepover at a friend's house where I played about an hour of Fallout 3 as a 12-year-old. It didn't hook me, unfortunately. I wouldn't pick up Fallout New Vegas on a whim until June of 2014, nearly 4 years after it came out. I was immediately hooked, and it's one of those games that is always on my hard drive. I actually heeded my dad's often ignored attempts to get me to learn basic coding just so I could understand what the creation engine was doing under the hood. It even convinced me to go back and actually finish Fallout 3, though that game has been rarely replayed since. So, when I heard Fallout 4 was in the pipelines, I was ecstatic. In retrospect, it's somewhat embarrassing just how excited I was about it. During the lead up to November 10th, 2015, I took several days off from work, bid my parents adieu, and disappeared into my parents' living room for about 2.5 days to play it. So, what did I think about Bethesda's latest offering when I emerged from my Fallout frenzy? I actually quite liked it, solid 4 out of 5 for me. In the years since 2015, I've gone back and touched just about every Fallout property it's possible to do so on PC. It actually turned me onto its spiritual predecessor in Wasteland and its spiritual successor in Metro, both franchises I love just as dearly. That's not to say that I think Fallout 4 is a bad game or that I wish to lay a pox upon Maryland. Well, I do want to do that, but that's for reasons unrelated to Bethesda. I'd like to use this video to talk about one element that has rubbed me a bit wrong as I've grown, that being the Eastern Brotherhood of Steel as led by Elder Arthur Maxson, hereafter referred to as the Maxson Chapter. Specifically, I would like to talk about what I assess they should be doing from day one of their expedition to Boston. I'll try to keep this consistent with previous characterization while explaining the advantages of said actions. Two small notes. I'm not really here to debate the morality of the Maxson Chapter's actions in the Boston Wasteland, whether synths have sapience, the sudden treasure trove of technology the Brotherhood has access to, or the Brotherhood's attitude towards ghouls and supermutants. Nor am I here to talk about Bethesda's decisions in regards to the Brotherhood of Steel during the interim period between Fallout 3 and Fallout 4. Those can all be their own videos if I get around to them. The Brotherhood of Steel is probably the most well-known part of the Fallout universe besides that of the Vaults themselves. Being an order of technology-obsessed warrior monks who held the keys to the best equipment in the game, you are actively handicapping yourself if you ignored them in Fallout 1. In each subsequent game, they were one of the best ways to get access to high-tier gear and equipment. Even at the nadir of their local influence in Fallout New Vegas, there are one of only 2 ways to get power armor training. The other way requires going down a companion's somewhat buggy personal quest line. Without that, you're basically limited to the rather disappointing NCR salvage power armor if you wanted power armor at all. A full deep dive into the history of the Brotherhood of Steel would take an hour to do it justice, so I will abbreviate as much as I reasonably can. While guarding a base called Mariposa in Central California just before the bombs dropped, Captain Roger Maxson and his troops discovered a series of brutal experiments being conducted as part of the Forced Evolutionary Virus Project, or FEV. Enraged by what they had discovered, Captain Maxson and his troops would put an end to these experiments, executing the scientists responsible and declaring their own mutiny against the U.S. Army just 3 short days before the bombs would fall on October 23rd. On October 27th, Captain Maxson would lead his troops and their families south to the Lost Hills bunker, though this trip was not without significant losses as the world burned around them. It was here that Captain Maxson and his troops would build what would become the Brotherhood of Steel. Now, who better to hear from than the man himself?
Appalachia Online, Captain.
I know most of you love America. Good old red, white, and blue. But those of us who served at Mariposa know something. America failed. Not because of its citizens, who lived clean lives filled with hardship in a never-ending war. Certainly not because of its fighting men and women. God bless them. No. Its leaders failed us. Senators, generals, presidents, all those bastards. Their failure almost destroyed all mankind. But I look around here, and I see survivors. People too stubborn, people too damn ornery to die. We've fought, and we've endured, and we finally have a small patch of safety. But having a home isn't enough. We need something more. What we need is purpose. We cannot look to the America of old for that purpose. We have to build our own. So tonight, as we break bread together, let us forge together something new, something strong, something we can be proud of, something we can build upon. We'll preserve what's best of what's come before us and use it. And one day, we will reclaim what was lost. Let us forge a brotherhood of steel.
To this end, the Brotherhood would be organized into 3 parallel castes: the scribes who would create the technology, the knights who would maintain the technology, and the paladins who would use the technology. These 3 castes had distinct roles and obligations, all overseen by an elder who was in charge of their own respective chapter. This elder would usually, but not always, be drawn from the paladin caste. As the Brotherhood expanded to have multiple chapters, a council of elders would be established and chaired by a single high elder, typically the senior-most descendant of Roger Maxson. Early on in its history, the Brotherhood was quite reclusive but willing to collaborate with and aid Wastelanders, especially when the incentive of new technology was present. This could take the forms of the destruction of raider gangs and supermutant hives, or the support of local industries such as in the fledgling NCR, where the Brotherhood would gradually reintroduce advanced technology as the local industry advanced. The eradication of supermutants was also an ideological goal for the Brotherhood, as supermutants were the result of FEV exposure experiments like those conducted at Mariposa. Brotherhood agents would act against both the Master and his unity in 2162 and against the Enclave in 2242. However, as the Brotherhood grew older, it became even more reclusive and xenophobic. Already having closed itself off to outsiders, it began to seize technology from citizens not just out of paternalistic concern, but in order to preserve their own dominance. The East Coast Brotherhood of Steel under Elder Owen Lyons started as an expeditionary force that left the Lost Hills bunker in 2254 and departed east with the objective of recovering any and all advanced technology on the East Coast. It's worth noting that the Brotherhood had been slowly pushed into irrelevance on the West Coast by the rising New California Republic, with whom they would soon begin to fight an escalating series of skirmishes. This NCR Brotherhood War isn't something we know much about, but it was still ongoing as late as 2282 as shown in Fallout New Vegas. This expedition would be either the second or third expedition eastward undertaken by the Western Brotherhood, depending on how one counts the now broad strokes canon status of the Midwestern Brotherhood. The previous expedition had been undertaken by Paladin Romani in 2103 in an attempt to re-establish contact with the Appalachian Brotherhood. Like everything related to Fallout 76, we don't really know how it will go, but given that West Virginia is quite close to DC and there is no mention of them in Fallout 3, it seems they likely weren't a factor by 2277. The expedition left around the same time Caesar's Legion began to forcefully unify the tribes of Arizona and was known to have made at least one stop in Pittsburgh, Philadelphia. Known to the region as the Pit, the area was beset by massive raider gangs, a higher number of mutations than normal, and a hostile group of degenerated humans known as the Trogs. Then Paladin Lyons ordered a culling of the Pit in an event known as the Scourge. In a single night and with only a single casualty, the Brotherhood purged a solid half of the Pit's population before departing with unknown technology, and approximately 20 unafflicted children who would be inducted into the Brotherhood. Arriving in Washington, D.C. in 2255, the expedition would find the capital wasteland filled with a technological bounty whose crowning jewel was Liberty Prime, a one-of-a-kind military robot that had laid incomplete beneath the Pentagon since the bombs fell. This discovery would lead to Paladin Lyons' promotion to Elder and the directive to form a new chapter in D.C. Establishing the Citadel on the ruins of the Pentagon, the nascent Owens chapter would find themselves in a land that needed their help. Beset by sickness, raiders, and supermutants, Elder Lyons would increasingly turn the chapter's attention to protecting those in the capital wasteland, with the collection of technology becoming a secondary concern. This change in priorities would be met with the disapproval of the leadership in Lost Hills and ignited debate in a way not seen since the departure of Elder Elijah for the Mojave. Unable to come to a proper consensus, Lost Hills would leave Lyons in place as Elder but cut off any external support or supplies by 2275. Unfortunately, there was also a similar schism within the ranks of the Lyons chapter, with Paladin Henry Kasdan leading a group of dissenters to establish a rival group at Fort Independence in 2276. The defeat of the Enclave and the success of Project Purity in 2277 would see the fortunes of the Lyons chapter change for the better, securing dominance of the capital wasteland and a steady stream of goodwill. The Brotherhood would send 3 reconnaissance teams to the Boston wasteland before its arrival in force. The first team was a total success, bringing back crates of technology and historical documents in 2280. The second team, known as Recon Squad Artemis, was a total loss. Artemis would fall victim to the local supermutant infestation in 2284, with only Paladin Brandis managing to survive in isolation. A third team, Recon Squad Gladius, would be sent to the Boston Wasteland in 2287. This team, led by Paladin Dance, would lose 4 of its 7 members to Raiders, Ghouls, and Supermutants over the course of several weeks. At the beginning of Fallout 4, Recon Squad Gladius is in dire straits at half strength and cut off from the Maxson Chapter. They are low on food and ammunition while under siege from the hordes of ghouls that inhabit Cambridge. The sole survivor of Vault 111 can potentially come to their aid, assisting Paladin Dance with recovering technology from ArcJet systems to re-establish contact with the Maxson Chapter. At the point of their arrival in force in the Boston Commonwealth, the Maxson Chapter has seized Boston Airport as their primary base and fortified the Cambridge Police Station. The Maxson Chapter has both manpower and advanced technology to throw at problems, but they potentially do not have the food stockpile to keep them supplied long term, based on Proctor Teagan's recurring farm missions. There also does not seem to be regular supply trips between Boston and the capital wasteland. It is implied, but not directly stated, that the Maxson Chapter may not have brought a sizable stockpile of cash from the capital wasteland, based on the fact that while you can pay for the crops from farmers directly, it's implied that you are meant to appropriate them instead of paying directly. Proctor Teagan pays the player 100 caps for each acquisition, and it costs 1,000 caps to buy them from the farms directly. This can be reduced to 500 caps with a skill check, but the farmers complain this will barely cover expenses. Your alternative to purchasing or appropriating the crops is to take them by force, potentially wiping out the settlement in the process. Anything other than buying them is a bad strategic play that actively hurts the Maxson Chapter in both the near term and long term. Intimidation and forceful acquisition will actively work against any goodwill the Maxson Chapter will acquire elsewhere. The destruction of the settlement just ensures there will be no one to grow the next crop cycle. These missions are implied to be under the table without command approval, as there is a request by Proctor Teagan on the Pridwin terminal to Lancer Captain Kells to establish trading relationships with the local settlements. There is no reply message or indication of approval, so this may be a place where a temporary emergency measure got turned into a Radiant mission in development. Proctor Teagan's message also mentions using vertibirds to provide escorts to trade caravans in exchange for preferable prices, which is absolutely a good idea. Elder Maxson will need to secure adequate supply lines for his forces in Boston if he wants to keep them fed. To do so, it would be best to turn to some strategies employed by Elder Owen Lyons while continuing to project his own brand of strength, unity, and purpose to keep hardliners within the chapter in line. The Maxson Chapter also has a public relations problem. While the sight of the Pridwin flying over the Commonwealth with vertibirds fluttering about was a definite shock and awe opening, they need to capitalize on it to prevent leaving the initiative to institute agent for work. As it stands right now, the only thing the average Wastelander knows about the Brotherhood is that they have a high technology base, are dogmatic in their beliefs, and are very insular. The Maxson Chapter is inherently an outside force that has, in the eyes of Wastelanders, invaded the area. Without intervention, the only source of knowledge will be rumors and statements from those who have met the Brotherhood in the capital wasteland. Finally, the Maxson Chapter has an information problem. While they did send 3 reconnaissance teams to the Boston Wasteland before the Pridwin's arrival, this is insufficient to find out what they need. They do not know where the Institute resides, as a search of the CI2 ruins seems to turn up no strong leads. The Maxson Chapter does not know who is amenable to working with them, whether for personal gain or mutual support. They likewise do not know what other enemies may oppose them beyond the Institute. First and foremost, the Maxson Chapter is in Boston to put an end to synth production and contain the technology if at all possible. Unlike his famous forefather, who knew it was impossible to wipe out knowledge of atomic weaponry even if he wished it otherwise, it is possible for Arthur Maxson to stamp out the technology. As it stands, the only known source of synths is the Institute, and while it would be over a pile of bodies, it would be achievable. It would even be ideologically consistent for the Brotherhood, given how his forefather executed the scientists responsible for the FEV experiments in Mariposa, another sin the Institute is guilty of. Second, the Brotherhood's perpetual mission is to secure advanced technology, both to keep it out of the hands of those who would abuse it or be harmed by it, but also to rebuild civilization as a whole. One of the Western Brotherhood's many failures was their refusal to recognize what the nascent New California Republic had evolved into, the West Coast. Beyond that, the Maxson Chapter does not seem to have any further goals in Boston. Do they wish to set up a Boston chapter, or even just a satellite force to the main Maxson Chapter? Or are they looking to nation build in the region, as partners or as a hegemon? Or are they a plague of locusts descending to pick the region clean of technology before departing in search of more? We do not see the Maxson Chapter attempt to rule or even really impose their will on Boston beyond their quest to wipe out synths. With the exception of the already mentioned farm missions, there are no examples of the Maxson Chapter attempting to take technology or other resources by force from those who would be amiable to trade. All of the technology acquisition missions given by Stripe Halen are against synths, raiders, feral ghouls, or cultists. They will attack the railroad and do take the time to acquire an advanced piece of technology in their possession, the predictive analytic machine, but the attack was due to ideological differences and the threat the railroad presented, not the technology gained. Paladin Danth will be furious with the player if they try to steal from or murder Wastelanders, saying the Brotherhood is above both. You'll also instruct them to be careful with the minigun they have control over on the vertibird ride to the prison, stating that the Brotherhood is there to make the lives of Wastelanders better, not worse, and that the Brotherhood is their only hope of salvation from the ticking time bomb that is the Institute. Obviously, he is biased, but it is still demonstrative in some way of what the Maxson Chapter believes. The Maxson Chapter views a reconstituted Minutemen with no shortage of condescension, but does not otherwise take steps against them until the Minutemen attack them first. We do not see them conducting purges of ghouls beyond the initial assault on Boston Airport, which was overrun by feral ghouls. There aren't any examples of troubled relations with the town of Goodneighbor, which is ruled, for lack of a better word, by a ghoul, Mayor Hancock. Paladin Danth even praises the ghoul residents of the Slog settlement for their clever use of pre-war architecture. They also don't try to muscle in on Diamond City either before or after the mayor is revealed to be an Institute synth. The primary opponent of the Maxson Chapter in Boston is the Institute, the source of synths and other horrors that have leaked back onto the Boston wasteland. The next opponent would be the Railroad, an organization devoted to spiriting synths away from the Institute in an ideological opposite to the Brotherhood's stance on synth. Their tertiary opponents would be the Raiders local to the region, though they come in many different flavors. The Gunners, for instance, are a cut above the average raider and are ostensibly mercenaries, though they seem to largely act as a higher tier of raider with access to plentiful stores of combat armor, laser weapons, plasma weapons, and even power armor. The various raider groups of Nuka World are the closest thing Fallout 4 has to distinct tribals, and they sit on a veritable treasure trove of pre-war technology, even if they seem unable to do anything further without player intervention. The Rust Devils are a small and rarely mentioned group of raiders with a higher knowledge base than average, and have access to a host of customized combat robots which would bring them into the Brotherhood's sights, to say nothing of their seeming conflict with the Mechanist. As discussed earlier, the Maxson Chapter suffers from a threefold problem set of supplies, public relations, and information. These three problems are in many ways intertwined, as the actual human terrain of an area will absolutely have an effect on any campaign undertaken there. While the Maxson Chapter absolutely needs to be fed, Proctor Teagan's under-the-table intimidation is absolutely the wrong way to go about it. That being said, going to the local settlements for food is a good idea when the Maxson Chapter can offer them something of value, that being both protection and knowledge in exchange for preferable prices and other agreements. Most of these settlements seem to be little more than a half dozen people living in a wooden shack with a rather pitiful crop, but that could be an instance of engine limitations and gameplay incentives influencing presentation. A similar instance in a Bethesda game would be Whiterun in Skyrim, which should logically have a population of a couple hundred people and associated farms, but has around 60 to 70 inhabitants in-game. For the sake of gameplay and narrative, we are also going to dismiss how, without widespread modern technology and knowledge, raising food for a group of people would require a near equal amount of people to create it, as throughout most of history it would take 8 or 9 farmers to generate the food needed to feed 10 people. Farming is by no means a simple profession. So, with that in mind, trading goods and services for food from the local settlements would be a high priority. Additionally, there is a federal ration stockpile guarded by raiders a relatively short distance west from Cambridge Police Station. While it is likely depleted, any food recovered is something they don't need to barter for. This also ties in nicely with my next point, that being death to raiders. The sheer number of raiders in the Boston wasteland could almost be viewed as a parallel society to that of the Diamond City, Goodneighbor, Bunker Hill triumvirate, not that those three seem to have any deeper connections beyond trade. The loss of Quincy and University Point to the Gunners and Institute respectively also cut down on the number of large-scale settlements, leaving the forces of civilization more outnumbered than ever, if you will excuse me being a bit hyperbolic. Working with those traders to find raider groups and put them to the torch will make the Commonwealth safer, while also providing additional materials and supplies that can be used to barter. Leveraging this will help establish a constant stream of good public relations and supplies to the Maxson Chapter. The next move would be to go on a public relations blitz using the power of radio. While any transmission put out by the Maxson Chapter directly would be viewed with suspicion as propaganda, a partnership with an established source like Diamond City Radio would be a better option. A series of sit-down interviews between Travis Miles and figures like Elder Maxson would be quite useful in this regard, allowing the Maxson Chapter to directly tell the people of the Boston Commonwealth exactly what they are there for and to dispel rumors born from uncertainty. These interviews should emphasize a desire for positive relations and peaceful exchange, such as that of food, advanced technology, and knowledge. A standardized bounty for functional pre-war technology should be advertised, with scalable finder's fees for tips that result in actual acquisitions. As for why I am choosing to go with Travis Miles instead of Piper Wright comes down to a few reasons. First and foremost is the power and reach of Diamond City Radio versus public occurrences, with the former being heard throughout the Boston Commonwealth and the latter relying on trade caravans and the literacy of the average wastelander to get their message spread. There is also a more personal aspect to a radio discussion that helps put people in the room rather than the more distanced nature of print journalism. Finally, and I'm going to catch some heat for this, Piper Wright isn't a good journalist. Setting aside the ideological clash between her anti-authoritarian streak and the Brotherhood status as a centralized authoritarian military organization, Piper's brand of journalism seems to be composed entirely of opinion pieces intended to elicit an emotional response. The closest thing she has to an editor seems to be her teenage sister. At worst, it delves into tabloid and yellow journalism. She's an attractive and sarcastic NPC who resembles the male soul survivor's dead wife, but that does not make her a good journalist. Another point is the Commonwealth supermutant problem, one left to them by a century of Institute experiments. To the average wastelander, the supermutants just showed up one day a century ago and have been a plague ever since. In 2180, a supermutant army even laid siege to Diamond City, only to be repelled by a force of Minutemen. The Maxson Chapter, by contrast, knows supermutants, with them being the closest thing the Brotherhood as a whole has to an ancestral enemy. It was the discovery of FEV experiments that led to Roger Maxson's desertion in 2077, after all. While they may not know where the supermutants are coming from, it is likely most people would be willing to blame it on the Commonwealth's boogeyman, the Institute. It would be to the Maxson Chapter's benefit to tell that story to the people of the Boston Commonwealth, and to do so often, emphasizing their past fights against supermutants, both against the Masters' unity on the West Coast and against supermutants in the Capital Wasteland. Undertaking missions against supermutant hives would be a good move. The presence of supermutants actively impedes operations and trading ventures. It is one thing to know the boogeyman is out there, it's another thing to know that someone is hunting the boogeyman and winning. People look favorably on safety and security in chaotic situations, and it is likely that should the Maxson Chapter allow it, people may come to settle near the Boston airport. Allowing this to happen, and even fostering it, may stretch resources a bit, but the results would be worth it so long as Boston airport remains secure. Additionally, establishing an outreach office in Diamond City would work wonders, allowing those staff there to extol the virtues of the Brotherhood in a more personal way. This would also let them establish productive relationships with knowledgeable wastelanders, such as those who staff the Diamond City Science Center. Another settlement of value to the Maxson Chapter would be Vault 81. A technological haven from the wasteland, how the Maxson Chapter chooses to interact with them could serve as an example of how the Maxson Chapter will behave when confronted with civilized people who have advanced technology. To finish off this section, how the Brotherhood chooses to react to the Covenant experiments would be another interesting point. Do they shut them down by force and wipe out the town for their complicity? Do they simply shut down the experiments and huck them up? Or do they allow them to continue in the hopes of eventually yielding a workable synth detection test? It may seem a bit odd to have a long-term strategy with the Maxson Chapter's own long-term goal being undefined. Nevertheless, repeating the steps listed above would be a good start. After finding and destroying the Institute, the Maxson Chapter should move to face the Gunners directly if they haven't been engaged already. The Gunners are demonstrably a destabilizing influence on the Commonwealth, even if their own long-term goals, motives, or even who is hiring them is left up in the air as far as lore goes. They are ostensibly mercenaries, which means they are actively losing money when not on the job, unless they have some sort of passive income stream that we do not see. Seriously, they operate out of Gunner's Plaza, but the number of jobs they are shown to be hired for can be counted on one hand. Once the Gunners are pacified, whether through force or diplomacy, the Maxson Chapter should turn their attention to the Raiders of Nuka World if they have not already become a non-factor. The location is a treasure trove of rare technology, and the Raiders enslaved the Wastelanders who were living there prior. Wiping out the Raiders and freeing those Wastelanders would buy a lot of goodwill, secure a great deal of technology, and potentially restore an economic hub the Boston Commonwealth sorely needs. With the Boston Commonwealth largely secured, it is time to turn their attention inward. Sponsoring the resettlement of Quincy and University Point would be large public relation wins, and show that the Maxson Chapter is trying to do good on a long-term basis. The Maxson Chapter does not have the manpower to administer these settlements directly, so leaving them run by Wastelanders would maximize the potential returns. The nearby site of Vault 88 is another potential treasure trove of technology and knowledge, all at the cost of exiling or executing one frankly monstrous ghoul who really should be dead by now. The Maxson Chapter as a whole is better served by a wasteland that has a positive relationship with them, and the safety imposed by the Maxson Chapter would make it easier for various settlements to cooperate with one another. The failure of the Commonwealth Provisional Government notwithstanding, The rise of a larger civilization in Boston would be to the Maxson Chapter's benefit, so long as they can maintain those good public relations. It likely will happen, and when it does, the Maxson Chapter should not make the mistakes of the Western Brotherhood. Recognizing this eventuality and cooperating with the state that emerges would be to everyone's benefit. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me ramble on about Fallout. This has been a fun little creative experiment for me, and I'm honestly looking forward to making more. I'd also like to thank my friends who, through the clever use of the no balls taunt, motivated me to actually get this experiment going. Have a wonderful day, and I'll hopefully see you weirdos again soon.